Page 56.
Which volume?
There's only one volume. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pedig Vav, Halacha Aleph, and God willing, today starting Halacha Beis, we're going to be learning Daf Nun Vav. We left off on Daf Nun Vav, Amud Aleph, by the two dots on the top line. The Gemara is referring back to the Shita of Rabbi Akiva that we brought in the Mishnah, that the Avodas Hagefen is only 3 Tvachim, unlike the Shita of the Chachamim. Indeed, how the Rambam paskins, that then we keep on repeating that when you have a halachically individual vine, you need to have 6 Tvachim. Don't forget, we also quoted above the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael that says that there is no Avodas Hagefen at all, that we're not having today. But what we will have today is that the Gemara is going to reiterate a rule that we already learned above, which is that halacha kedivrei mishu mekel b'chutz la'aretz, which means that even when in the Holy Land we follow the stringent opinion, which would be in our case 6 tefachim from avodas hagefen, being that chutz la'aretz kili yakenim is midrabanan. So in chutz la'aretz we're going to follow the lenient opinion, which would mean we're going to follow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva that b'chutz la'aretz by a gefen yechidi you only need to have 3 tvachim. And actually, because of the application of the halacha kedivrei mishu hu mekel b'chutz la'aretz to our case, we're going to have a phenomenal qualification or a limitation to this rule itself, as we'll see when we learn it inside. This is all the end of halacha aleph. We're going to start on daf nun vav amud aleph, already the new Mishnah halacha base, in which we're going to have 2 dinim. And the first will be the din of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and the other one will be a din from Rabbi Eliezer. Now, I want to clarify something, and I really want to thank again. There is a Lubavitcher young man, Rabbi Moshe Wiener. He learns with us. And for a long period of time, every time I quoted Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, whenever we learned together something in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, I would always throw out there kav v'naki, which is partially true. Kav v'naki literally means that Chazal say various times that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is not mentioned that often. Like a kav is a very small measurement, but when you have a small measurement of clear, clean, high quality flour, it's okay that it's not that much because it's gavaldik. Which implies that the halacha follows like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We also repeated many years ago that kav is kuvav, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is mentioned 106 times, which is a very small number compared to the other Tanoim. And every time I learned Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, I would throw out there kav and naki. So, and I really want to thank Rabbi Moshe that there are 2 Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovs. There are 2 Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovs, and only the older one, on him you say kav and naki, and not on the younger one. And that will answer why, if you actually know all the Mishnayos, and you're going to see it's more than 106, because we're mixing 2. There was the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that was a contemporary of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenis. Okay, that's the generation noch before Rabbi Akiva. And then you have the later Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that was a contemporary with Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Loi. He was a contemporary with the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, right? The 5 or the 6 Talmidei Rabbi Akiva after the disaster of the 12,000 pairs passing away in the period that is a more until today a national mourning period for the Jewish people. So I just want to throw it out there now. To know which Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is which, I don't know. L'chu'ura, anyways, not l'chu'ura, I'm not going to say anything right now. I just want to remind everyone that there are 2 Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovs. Having said that, the case of the halacha beis, the first din, the first case of halacha beis, is going to be what we would call a aris shuhu yoytze min hamadrega. And I'm happy and I thank you, Kevan, you're going to show a picture. But we'll get to that case. There's going to be a scenario where there's a maras ayin issue, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And because of us quoting a din of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that's really based on maras ayin, the Gemara is going to quote 3 other dinim from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov connected to maras ayin. That will be a big bulk of today's daf. Then we're going to learn, in the Seder, in the Mishnah, we're going to learn one after the other. Their second din in the Mishnah is B'chlal, a whole different din, the din of Rabbi Eliezer. He's going to be speaking about someone planting a vineyard, not an udis, not a trellised vineyard, a regular vineyard. That, don't forget, according to Basil, you only have a din of a kedem if you have at least 2 rows, but one on a embankment, that's called a madrega. So just imagine, like you saw in the picture a moment ago, right? You have a flat field, and then you have a little mound, and the mound goes up 10 tefachim or more. 1 row is on the mound, 1 row is on the ground. The question is that, not, in other words, just use this picture right now, whoever's looking, not for the actual case of the Mishnah, but just to take a look at a mound. So the Rabbi Eliezer is going to tell you that if the height of the mound is 10 tefachim, we do not combine, we don't combine 1 row with the other. And therefore, when it's your regular kedem that needs to have 2 rows in order to have din kedem, you won't have a din of a kedem. It's going to have the din of a gefen yechid. That will be the din of Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara, we'll see how far we're going to get. It's going to wonder whether, I'm just going to share the words right now. When the Mishnah speaks about the height of 10 tefachim on the mound, on the madrega, is it Gavoya Shura or Gavoya Madrega? We'll see what that means when we learn the Gemara. And without any further ado, Chavra, again, Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph by the 2 dots. The Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that Rabbi Akiva Omer, that when you don't have a halachic vineyard, yes, you have to have space left for the avodah, which doesn't demand oxen or doesn't demand wagons. You don't need to have 4 amas, but you need to have the general consensus is 6 tefachim. Says Rabbi Akiva, only 3. And the Gemara is going to go right into the halach. So Rabbi Yehuda says, the Gemara, it says in the name of Rav, that halachi ke Rabbi Akiva. Now, when you have that, now don't forget, Rav was the Rosh Yeshiva in Surah, right? Rav was in Bavel. Rav learned in Eretz Yisrael, but when Rabbi Yehuda is quoting him, right? Rabbi Yehuda was the Talmud Rav, then Talmud Shmuel, a Talmud of Shmuel. When he quotes Rav, he's quoting what Rav said when he was in Bavel. So the Gemara wants to now clarify, this is the way that Rashi learns the Gemara, that don't think Rav was paskening how the halacha is in the Holy Land. No. Says the Gemara that Rabbi Yaakov Baridi, in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that you know why Rav says halacha ke Rabbi Akiva. Rav was in Bavel, meaning in b'chutz la'aretz, because Rav is following the rule that halacha ke divrei mishu mekel b'chutz la'aretz. But since in Eretz Yisrael there is a machlokes tanoim, and Rabbi Akiva is more lenient than the shita of the Chachamim that say 6 tefachim. So it's not that Rav is paskening in the Holy Land like Rabbi Akiva. No, Rabbi Akiva, Rav is saying that since in chutz la'aretz, where the whole Kili Akedem is only midrabbanan, now we want to apply how much space do you need to leave. In chutz la'aretz, you get to follow the lenient opinion. And indeed, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baracha, you're right, that Vetane Taman, that this was taught there, meaning this is a din in Bavel, that halacha kedivre mishu who mekel b'chutz la'aretz, implying that Rav and the Yidden that lived in Bavel that were lenient were only lenient b'chutz la'aretz. Not kan in the Gemara. Now let me remind everyone that we learned about Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael said that avodas hagefen doesn't need to have any space. So you can right away challenge this. If we're going to say that halacha kedivre mishu who mekel b'chutz la'aretz, so why didn't Rav paskin like Rabbi Yishmael? So this is really not a question, it's an observation. That don't make everything so black and white. Because of halacha kedivre mishu who mekel b'chutz la'aretz, it means you will always follow the most lenient opinion. Adarabah. The Gemara is being marambas that there's a limit to that. And that's what the Rashi earlier says, all the way in the bottom of the right column, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. In the Rashi earlier, kedivre mishu mekel b'chutz la'aretz koloimet. The hamekel ba'aretz, halacha k'moy say only b'chutz la'aretz. Kedeisa reish peiriketzat bevarchim in Bavli brachas lamed vav. And now, having said that, v'loy sfiralei l'Rav Yehuda, like another Talmud of Rav, which is Rav Huna, that we quoted him above in Yerushalmi in our pagination Daf Mem Gimel. That over there, Rav Huna paskin halacha ke Rabbi Yishmael b'chutz la'aretz the ein avodah l'gefen yechidis at all. So the point of Rav is that the lace the chash l'had Rabbi Yishmael, that is not even taken into account. So kedivre mishu mekel with a limit. Rabbi Yishmael the Bechlal did not accept. You have a question. The Chachamim 6 tvachim, Rabbi Akiva 3 tvachim. So Rav paskin that b'chutz la'aretz because of the rule halacha kedivre mishu mekel we get to use the limitation of only 3 tefachim.
Rabbi, the size of a person doesn't change. It's the same size.
David is making a very good point. And it's all because it's only midrabanan. And
no, I mean, but still, people are people.
And okay, I want to add one. What came to my mind was, Kevan, that again, I came to my mind because we just quoted this. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago by Muksha, that if you remember by Kilei Zerayim, other than the 6 by 6 tefachim, if you have 2 vegetable patches, you can have the 2 vegetables not mingling, but mamish going adjacent. In other words, I know we're into Kilei Akedim already, a couple of chapters, we have this 4 amas. Kilai means mingled. If they're not together, that's Rabbi Yishmael. It's not mingled. It's not taroivus. It looks like it's mingled. You don't need to have space. Okay, weiter. Now here we go. 2 dinim, different. There's a connection because it's both speaking about a madrega. The word madrega either means a step. He teaches it an embankment. We're speaking about a raised mound of earth. And before you look at everything else, just look at the earth. You're going to see that to the right there's a flat ground, and then it inclines up like a step, and then you have a top layer, bottom top, with the incline going up. When we introduced in our Pedic the udis, whether the grapes, the vines are trellised on a wall, on wood sticks. We also spoke about in the Mishnah that it was hanging over a cleft in the ground that's deep 10 tefachim. It was always that you have vines. First of all, they're trellised. It gives it more chashivus. And the height of the vines above the trellis is 10 tefachim above the ground. That was what we had until now. Now we're learning that the base of the vines is already on ground that's higher than the ground beneath it. It's on a madrega. We're going to use the word madrega. Now, why is that important in the first case of the Mishnah? So take a look at the picture. And I wish you can see the picture over here. So you can see the picture? Here we go. There's a rule. The rule is that I am not allowed to plant foreign seed under vines. Doesn't matter how high the vines are. If there are vines up there, underneath it, I'm not allowed to plant foreign seed. That's a given. However, in our case, the vines protrude above the low ground. Doesn't matter how much, but it protrudes above the low ground. And now, being that you have an udis, the udis gives it a din of a vineyard. By a vineyard, you have to distance foreign seed 4 amas. So the question is, from where do you count the 4 amas? So we just had in the previous Mishnah, even if you want to throw in here the machlekes b'shama and b'silol, whether you count it from the wall, whether you count it from the vines, right, which are very in this picture, the very near one, the other. So the Mishnah is going to give you a scenario where you can only begin counting the 4 amas once you step out of the overhang. In other words, we're going to consider any part under the vines as being in it, and you only begin counting 4 amas when there's nothing above your head. That will be the first case of the Mishnah. Now let's read it inside. Adis shuhu yoytze min hamadrei. So you have these trellised vines, and they're protruding from the whole thing, the whole vines and the adis is all on the top of the madrega, and the vines are going, let's say, horizontally out, whether it's a amma, whether it's 10 ammas, it doesn't matter how far out, but it's going out a lowland. And again, that you're not allowed to plant under those protruding vines, that's for sure. The question is, from where do you count the 4 ammas? So says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that this is the rule, and this is for sure a rabbinic rule, that if when you're standing on the lowlands, if you are able to pick your hands up and to be boitzet and to harvest the grapes from these vines. So, guys, we're not talking about 10 tefachim. It's much more than 10 tefachim. But so what? 10 tefachim is not even 2 feet, right? We're speaking about a person when they stand there. There's 3 amas, and then they extend their hand. It's 4 amas. It's quite high up. As long as when the person is standing on the ground, they are able to harvest the grapes from these vines, we consider rabbinically the earth under the vines as being in the vineyard. And therefore, when you have to count the daladamas from the vineyard, it's not from the wall and it's not from the trunk. No, it's from the end of the overhang. That's the din midrabanan. Like you see in the picture, from when you leave the overhang. But the imlav means that if the height of the vines are so high that when you are standing on the ground beneath it, you are unable to harvest it, it's beyond your reach. So then, first of all, no doubt that you have to have 4 amas from the wall or from the vines. That's no doubt. But what happens if you have 4 amas? Let's say it goes out 10 amas. Once you already have the 4 amas, you're never going to be allowed to plant underneath. That you can't. But you don't have to count dalad amas from the end of the overhang. Kinegdo means that which is directly underneath it, opposite it, underneath it. That's the first din of the Mishnah. Now that we spoke about a madrega, so now we're going to learn another halacha, not related, but the link is the madrega. And this is from the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, which is normally Rabbi Eliezer Haggadah. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer. Oh, now he's not speaking about an aris, because we're going to go that according to everyone, once you have a trellised vineyard, even Lebeis Hillel, you don't need to have 2 rows to create the din of a vineyard. But we're speaking about the normal kedem. There are no trellises now. There are no walls now. You have 2 rows. But what happens is that so he doesn't even have a picture. You don't need a picture. In other words, you have 2 rows. Belong to the same person or not, doesn't matter. One is on the ground, one is on the madrega. Now the Gemara is going to go into the details, exactly where in the madrega. The Mishnah does not clarify. One is on the ground, one is on the madrega. This is a madrega that, so he says like this. If I mentioned in the first case of the Mishnah 10 tefachim, I take it back. The Mishnah didn't mention it. Here we mentioned 10 tefachim. If the height of this step, of this madrega, now again, it's not clear. Is the madrega 10 tefachim high? Is there a separation of 10 tefachim between one row and the other vertically? We'll clarify that in the Gemara. But if there is some sort of gap of 10 tefachim in the height, then we say eino mitztarefes imo. The upper row does not combine with the lower row. The lower row does not combine with the upper row. And therefore, yes, you have a din of a gefen yechidi, but you don't have a din of a keren. But the imlav, meaning that if you don't have a 10 tefach gap, now even though one is on the ground, one is on the madrega, so what? It combines. Now, of course, it has to be within the 4 amas and the 8 amas. So it's the rules that we learn above apply as a given. But this is an addition that this 10 tefachim gap will make a difference. Imlav, hareizu, yes. And now, now you have to have for the avodah of empty space, you have to have 4 amas, and it's not enough to have the 6 tefach. Okay, very clear. So the Mishnah gave you 2 different halachas concerning a madrega, and let's go back. The Gemara is going to begin with the first rule of the Mishnah, and as we explained when we said the Mishnah, now we'll go into more details. That for Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov to give this klal, that if when you stand on the ground underneath the vines, if you're able to harvest, then you consider that mamish in the vineyard. Then you have to start counting the daladamas only from immediately after the overhang. That's not something that's midayrais. And you know what? Before we even begin the Gemara, look inside the Marafulda. The Marafulda is 6-7 lines right? The second narrow line from the top, im. You can look at the picture. If if you are able, while you're standing on the ground, of course, in other words, if you're going to have a ladder, then there's nothing to talk about. But when you're standing on the ground, then that we make believe as if the trunks are underneath it. And therefore, from where misfas ha'aris ulachutz, from the edge of this overhang, like you see in the picture. Now, being that it's self-understood, this shear is not a.
Rabbi, excuse me, edge to the left or to the right? I'm sorry.
Edge to the right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, v'davkem lechatchilu the asil Israel, avaleinu mekadosh elavav tvachim. And so that the Manafulda says that even though Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying what he's saying, it must be a din d'Rabbanan. And as we'll see in the Gemara, it's a din of Marasayin. And one of the big nafkaminas, whether it's d'Oraisa or d'Rabbanan, we had this already many times, is that whenever it's Kili Hakerem d'Oraisa, not only is it Asur, but if you violated it, it becomes Asur B'Hanoah. And we are going with most of the Rishonim's approach that whenever Kili Hakerem is only Asur mid-Rabbanan, it doesn't make it Asur B'Hanoah. So therefore, when the Mishnah says, the Mishnah speak about you're not allowed to plant, the Asur Lizraya Abel Eina Mekadosh. Okay. Now, if you are beyond Yakir, 4 ames from the wall or from the vines, of course, because we're not going back. We are keeping all of the rules in the place and we're pushing it forward. So now comes the Gemara. Says the Gemara, and we're going to have various statements that Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, and even though it doesn't say the shame, but that's the way it means. In the name of Rabbi Yonasan. Now it says, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So now we're going to have what I'm going to call, the Gemara is going to bring 3 cases. In addition to the case of a Mishnah, where we see that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was particularly concerned with Maris Ha'ayin. In the case number 1, Hagoymem eskarmoi pachus mitefach. So you have vines. And for whatever reason, you're cutting down, you're trimming down, not just the vines, the trunk. How close to the ground? You are already within a tefach. You didn't leave a tefach. It's pachus mitefach. Now what? And now it regrew. What's the question? Is it considered the old vines or is it considered the new vine? Lamay nafkemina. Whether you are obligated to in the Dinei Arlo. So says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that, and this is unique, Chayiv ba'arlo. Now I want you to make it clear, the Chayiv ba'arlo does not mean midorais. Since you did not trim the trunks all the way down to the ground, you left a little stump, even though it was less than a tefach. Biblically, it's still there. And if it regrows and grows grapes, you can right away harvest it. You already kept it. You have the halachic arla years behind you. But mipnei marasa'ayin yechayev ba'arlo. That's very important. Now, in contrast, that divrei chachamim, don't read divrei chachamim. No, Atkan was Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. However, in contrast, divrei chachamim achiyogim im haaretz. That only if you were raised it all the way to the ground, then midoiraisa, it's going to be arlo. Even though you have the roots, but if you took it all the way to the ground, that's considered a new growth. If you left it even under a tefach, the chachamim are not concerned of marasa'ayin. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was concerned. I heard a gavaldik word that how many eyes do we have? We have 2 eyes. So why don't we say marasa'ayin? That's exactly the point. That if someone would have both of their eyes open, they wouldn't convolute one case with the other. If someone would have both of their eyes open, they know. Everyone knows that the halacha is all the way to the ground, arla, new. If there's something left, it's good. But what does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying? Someone might not see that perfectly. You're only looking with one eye. To you, it might look like it went all the way to the ground, and still you're not keeping the din of arla, so they can become influenced in a negative way by saying, even if it's all the way down to the ground, I don't have to keep arla. That confusion, that's marasa'ayin, not chshad, but marasa'ayin, as we mentioned many times. That's rule number 1.
Is a tevach visible by somebody outside the vineyard?
Depends how old you are. It depends what type of eye ailments you suffer with. You have macular degeneration. You have you have all these things that people have to go through. It depends on your vision. Glaucoma. We always have Rab David, the eye magician over here. He'll make you a pair of glasses. He'll amend the prescription like he did to me, Gavaldi.
I'm wearing him. Yes.
So he knows better than all of these doctors, and he taka does. And he does this trick and that trick, so your brain actually is telling you that you can see when you don't. Okay. Now,
Rabbi, before in the introduction, the sound went off for a second. So just clarify, is this the Kavanaki Eliezer?
So I was saying, Danny, I do not know. That's the beauty.
Got it.
I just want to throw it out because I remember when I was learning this yesterday, but for some reason, Kavanaki goes into my head. And another detail, we learned that Kavanaki is only if he's mentioned in the Mishnah. I was into this many years ago because the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in the Braisa, we don't necessarily paskin like it. But even in the Mishnah, we don't always paskin like it because it's the other one. Oh.
But isn't it a rule that when you have two opinions, so it always goes after the second one?
No such a rule. No such a rule. The big rules, let's see if you remember the daf. We had, it was in Sanhedrin, right? Where did we have the big klali in the shas of
we just had in Sanhedrin yesterday's daf, actually.
Wow. Whoever's learning daf. Give me, what's the daf over there?
It was, that was a case of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir.
But what daf? What daf are we talking about?
I think it's Chav Zayin.
Chav Zayin earlier. Okay. Amid Beis on the top. I remember where it is. Okay.
That was okay.
Okay, right. Anyways, that's the first Maras Ayin. Now the second, again, these are the Gemara is giving us three independent of the Mishnah. And guess who walked in? ABC walked in with the Maras Ayin. There we go. We were speaking about your koyach of giving people a better vision. Because that's it. Now, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, you see, I just want to understand this better. Like sometimes it's two different Amiroim. Like they both said the same thing. Here it's Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And you see, and above, all it said was Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Rabbi Yonasan. No, is it a mistake in the Girsa? I don't know yet how this works. But anyways, it's always going to be Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, whether the Gemara says the word b'shem or not, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, rule number 2. But now, for people who have Gaguyim for the previous Masechtes, so we learned, right, Masechtes Peyim. And we have a din of leket. Leket is that when you are gleaning stalks, if 1 or 2 fall from your hand in a specific time, they must be left on the ground for the poor. Shikha is then when you are gathering the sheaves, if you forget 1 or 2, you have to leave them for the poor. And peya means that you have to leave the edge. We learned the edge is normally left at the edge, but it doesn't have to be the edge. It can be even in the middle of the field. Midrabanan echad mishishim, you have to leave a certain part of the produce unharvested, standing, for the poor. When the poor will go and gather the leket, shikha, and peya, these are items from which you're not obligated to give any of the trumas or maises. That's the din Torah. However, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that if someone gathered such a large amount that he's mamish piling it into the kri, that people will always pile it in, and the chalois chiyuv of trumas u'maisros is when it's in, when you smooth out the kri. If you did that again because of maras ayin, you're chayiv. Truma Gedoyla. And make no mistake, my friends, Truma Gedoyla doesn't only mean Truma Gedoyla, it means beginning with Truma Gedoyla. That mid-rabbanon, you're chayiv to tithe it all. Truma Gedoyla. And then you have to take off Meiser Rishon, and then you have to take off Trumas Meiser from Meiser Rishon, and Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ran. And why is that? Now, you can be poor, make no mistake, and you can own land. I would say that most people that we know are halachically poor, and they own land. The more land they own, the poorer they are, the more money they owe. What do I know? So just to make it clear, you can own land and be poor. Now, if a poor man grows his own produce, he's chayiv to separate from it like from when he makes the kri. Now, it's not that common that one poor person gathers that much like a chikhopeya for him to be able to make a kri out of it. So if that happens, again, there's a maras ha'ayin, and only according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, then he's chayiv midrabanan. And the third ruling, completely not connected to agriculture. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, here again, B'Shem Rabbi Yonason, B'Shem Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And this, now, he says Mishum Beis Shammai, and we're going to clarify soon whether only Mishum Beis Shammai is this third halacha, or perhaps all of these three statements are all following the opinion of Beis Shammai. We'll see that in a moment. But what is it? That Hameis, that if a person is going to become impure from a corpse, so the general rule is, how does one become impure? Through maga, through masa, and then you have the unique halacha only by corpse tuma of oil. Oil can happen in one of the three ways: that a person, a keli, food or liquid goes over the mace. The item that will acquire tuma is the oil over the mace, or the mace went over those items. Someone carried the mace, or the person, the object, the food, the liquid, and the mace are under the same oil. Doesn't matter which way. But that's even though there was no contact, there was no masa, there was no hesed. Nevertheless, it's tummy anyway. That is biblically. Came along the Chachamim, and by the way, we pass in that way. And we say that Hameis Metama Arba Amis B'Reshus Harabim Mepnei Kavodah. That if a person walks within 4 amis of a mace, we're not even talking about a kaved. That's different. That's worse. From the mace, there is a chashash that maybe the person was mile over it. Or let me speak about the words maras ha'ayin. That even though you did not go over the mace did not go over you. For sure, there was no contact. The observer might have. He only looked with one eye. And what did he see with one eye? He thinks that you did have oil. And therefore, and if you're not going to be noig the dinei tuma, he might mistakenly think that maybe there's no oil that way, when there is. So what did the Chachamim say? That if you get within 4 amos of a mace, not only in a cave in a cemetery, which has its own tuma, no, in the Reshus Harabim, you're going to become tamei midrabanan from tumas mace. That's the third maras ha'ayin. And now says the Gemara, Rav Mana says, I want you to know that from these 3 dinim, we only had at the third one, Mishum Beis Shammai, and indeed, only Hada Acharaniyasa Mishum Beis Shammai, meaning the first 2 halachas, don't reflect only Beis Shammai. And generally, my friends, when you quote Beis Shammai, I know you have the exception, right? The Shmeina Asar Davar, Shabbos Bavli Yud Gimel Amud Beis, right? I think in the Mishnah, going on over there, that's sugya. But otherwise, Beis Shammai really would mean it's not so the halach. We're really limiting it. So only the last one is limited. However, Rabbi Yossi ben Abun says no, that Kulan Mishum Beis Shammai. So they're really arguing whether we reject, they are saying, the last one, or whether we reject all 3. Okay, be that as it may, why are we bringing it up over here? Because in these 3 halachas, that we have the maras ayin. I know, my friends, that the word maras ha'ayin is only written in the first 2. I know that. In the third one, in our version, it doesn't say maras ha'ayin. It just says kavoidoi. It's amazing. Taka kavoidoi. You know what? I want to correct myself. Kavoidoi means very good. Look inside. Let's go with the Pnei Moshe again. Let's look inside the Pnei Moshe. 6 lines before the end of the narrow lines. Hameis Madam Aram is b'Reshus Harabim. Claim afilu hu munach b'Reshus Harabim. Ve'ena ma'ilolo. Gazru chachamim shemetame kol hanichnas ba'arba amet ba'ar lo'ay kavoida. What's kavoida? Claim b'pnei hametaplam ima l'kavoida. U'lepa'amim miskarbon etzloi acho poishin ishadu ma'ilolo v'lava datayum. Kavoida means that a person, if he won't take extra precautions of staying further away, the person might end up being mile over it without knowing it. Now, so the word kavod is amazing. Kavod means people are there to help the mace. That's for kavod mace. So the kavod is a good thing. You're doing a good thing. You want to give honor to the mace. You want to help out. What are we afraid that the people that are there for the kavod of the mace, they're going to help, they might mistakenly do an act of oil, they won't know it, and then they're going to eat taras. So they said, no, go give kavod, but you also wissen sein that the moment you get within the aldamas, you're already tummy. So that's not maras ha'ayin. That's not maras ha'ayin. So now, Amar Rabbi Yoina, that the first two was Manas Ayin, that Uf Hadod the Taninon, when we learned in our Mishnah, the din of Arish Hu Yoitzim in Amadrega. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the one that says, well, if you can harvest it when you're standing on the ground, then you count. Then you count daladamas from the edge of Yakir, of the right, whatever, of the edge. But if you can't harvest it, then you count the daladamas from the aris itself, from the wall, from the trunks, not from the overhang, even though you cannot plant underneath it. So you should know that the reason why he says it is because of Maras Ayin. Because the law came, which means the im loy came, if not for that, there should be no difference.
Right,
in other words, there is no biblical basis for such a differentiation. Such a concept of you could pick it or you can't pick it, that is a Maras Ayin issue. In other words, when people see that you can pick it with your hands, it will appear to the person that you are standing in it. And therefore, why are you not counting daladamas from there? They won't necessarily realize that the wall or the grapes or the trunks are away. They won't notice that because that's the Maras Ayin.
It's not the 4 amot needed to plant other stuff.
Biblically, you need 4 amos from the trunks of the geffen and from the wall. And when you're speaking about practically, Kevan, that you need to have the avoida to work, by the fact that it's high up, it's not getting in your way. You can get animals and wagons that won't get in the way.
Can I ask a question on that, Rabbi?
One second, Kevin. Did I answer your question?
Yes, actually, yes.
Okay. Yes, Danny.
And I've been wondering this since the beginning of this year. Why are we looking at we're counting from the edge of the overhang?
Yep.
The entire time we've been learning this Masechta, when we're talking Dalet Amos, I thought the machlekes was, do you start from the trunk or the middle of the trunk, or whatever, the Beisham Beisil that we're learning. Since when do we go to the edge of where it grows to and start counting from then?
That was my question too.
Every Dalet Amos would be way more than Dalet Amos.
So let me say like this, Nanny. Now that we learned this Mishnah, if when the oris is planted on a mound, you have to have daladamas from the edge of the branches. Let me give you a kalva chaymer, that when everything is planted on the ground, now we're learning a new din, that you have to start counting the daladamas mipnei maras ha'ayin from the edge of the branches. That's what it sounds like to me.
Does it find even?
That is what it sounds like, but did we ever learn that so far?
No, we did not.
Wow.
Every day we're learning new things over here. And,
I know,
and you
but
have to reorganize everything.
We're talking about mounds and inclines, and I'm just, wait a minute, let's back up here. Just counting from the edge of the growth changes the whole equation for everything we've learned.
I would argue not, because it doesn't sound like other vines extended so far. I think that this extension is only because it's on over a wall, and because it's on a mound, there's space for it to grow. I'll tell you more than that, Danny. I'll tell you logically. We're saying that the normal space was 4 amos. Our Mishnah must be speaking about a case that it went way beyond 4 amos. If you don't have an aris, which means that if the vines are laying on the ground, you would trim the vines way before that. No, the mitzvah is that it's so long is probably dafka because it's not only is it on a aris, but it's also the whole thing began on a mound. So you're just letting it grow wild.
In this case, there's no gravity. Nothing is pulling it down. It's just staying up there. Sorry.
Exactly. That's the thought process I have also. Like this thing's going out horizontally. It weighs 10 amos.
Very good, Vlad. I think that the vines. I want to thank Gabriel Weiss. Mamish, see Hashgacha Pratis. We are going to be going in the next couple of weeks at a Sunday. We're going to be going to a vineyard that's within an hour of LA, and we're going to have with us, like he told me, not him. He's a mumcha. He's getting someone who's a real mumcha in planting a vineyard. It's geschmack. We shechted an animal by chulin. Let's go to a vineyard. Yeah, we're going to do that. And I think the vines, if they're thick enough, they can protrude that way. Let's mark this question down to the manager.
Well, but just that said, just going back to the general concept of a trellised vineyard, which is most vineyards, right? When you're counting the dalet amas between each of those vines, it sounds like this.
You're going from Ekerak Fanim. Now we're saying that rabbinically, if the vines extend a lot and you can stand on the ground, then you need
dalet amas from the edge of the growth. Okay.
Yes, very good. I had many of such moments, Danny, up until Daf Nun Vav, where you have a certain thing, and then you have to, when you add something, you have to reorganize the whole thing.
Okay, I was thinking of this is the beginning of the shir, and I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't.
That's called That's what it means. When Mashiach is coming, in other words, we're learning. God gave this to Moshe and Sinai. We just never learned it, and then you think you know, and then you have to reorganize everything. Now let's see how far we can get. I want to just go over here. If you can please pick up the picture on 56b2. I know it's late, but this is very important because I want to be able to finish tomorrow. Daf Nun Zayin. So listen. We're moving on to the next case of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And Rabbi Eliezer says that, I'm just quoting his words, that Af haniteya achas ba'aretz va'achas b'madrega. You're talking about a madrega. Okay, fine. So you have a field, and you have the lowland, and then you have this incline, and then you have this top of the mound. So he says that if there is a height of 10 tefachim, then we don't combine one row with the other. And we're speaking not about a trellised vineyard. Therefore, you have to have Lebesilo 2 rows. So you have to combine them. So they won't combine. Now there's 2 Gavoya. So the Gemara has 2 ways of understanding what the Mishnah is saying. Either Gavoya Shura or Gavoya Madrega. And I'll speak out what it means. Let's just read the words inside. What does it mean, 10 Tvachim? Option number 1 is going to be referred to, guys, remember this for tomorrow, Gavoya Shura, literally means the row is 10 Tvachim high, which means that if the row on the embankment, the row is 10 Tvachim higher than the row on the ground. In other words, if there is a 10 Tvachim height between the upper row and the lower row, that is when they don't combine. Let me repeat it. Gavoya Shura means that if you have 10 tefachim of height between the upper row and the lower row, you're looking at the rows themselves. If there's a 10 tefachim height between the upper and the lower, they don't combine. I want to add a parenthesis, again, to be clarified. I think we're talking about the 10 tefachim between the highest point of the lower one and the lowest point of the higher one. You have to have 10, if there's 10 tefachim of gap between the lower and the higher, then they don't combine. But if they are within 10 tefachim, then they do combine. That's simple. Or the Mishnah means Gavoya Madrega. Now what's Gavoya Madrega? That if the Madrega is 10 tefachim of height, if the Madrega goes up to 10 tefachim, even if you planted one row on the lower part of this embankment, right? You planted it lower on the embankment. Look inside in the picture, row number 2. Row number 2 is within 10 tefachim from row number 1. Row number 1 is on the ground. Row number 2 is early in the beginning of the embankment. If you actually look at the 2 rows, row number 1 and row number 2 are within 10 tefachim. But maybe the Mishnah is saying is that since row number 2 is planted on this incline, and the height of the incline all the way up there is 10 tefachim or more. So now we look at the entire madrega as a makom b'fnei atzmai. Even though the row is within 10 tefachim of the row on the ground, it still does not combine. That's called Gavoya Madrega. So we don't know whether it's Gavoya Shura or Gavoya Madrega. That's the Gemara's kasha.
But why not consider from the top to an outsider, even if you're on embankment, it looks like they're the same level.
We're going to leave the Marasayin for later. I know we learned about Marasayin, but the din of our Mishnah is not connected to Marasayin. And I'm not minimizing your question, but leave us. No, I want to make it clear. The din that we are up to is not a Marasayin. We want to combine or disconnect 2 rows. 10 tefachim, is it Gavoya Shura? That's what we are asking. Or is it Gavoya Madrega? And we're going to leave the question open, and God willing to be continued.